We're just going to wait a few more minutes for everyone to join. So all the participants will have their videos off. This will be recorded, so there's some that couldn't join, so we can go ahead and share that with them at the end. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and start. I'm going to go ahead and let the participants join as they pop up. So thank you so much for coming today. I am really excited to have Dr. Nate Dutra present today. I noticed on Facebook that someone had posted his dissertation topic, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. How and when and why parents learn ASL. That's an important topic because that really will influence the child as they pick up ASL throughout their life. So thank you so much, Nate, for presenting today. And I will go ahead and spotlight Nate so that you are able to see him. And then you should be able to hear the interpreter as well throughout the presentation. Hello everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I am really excited to talk to you about this topic. It is an extremely important topic. So as you can see this picture here, really dinner time at the table is extremely important for all of the kids and the families to sit around at the end of the day and talk about different topics, about work, about school. Many of us take that for granted. We do that, just kind of everyday life. But for so many of our deaf children out there, that doesn't happen. It happens very rarely. And this is called dinner table syndrome, which means the kids are left out. All of the families are having a conversation and chatting, and the kids do not benefit from the social lessons, from hearing family, brothers, sisters, parents have talks, have arguments, have discussions. So the social lesson there is very powerful. Home is the child's first school. So I'm going to show you a video. This is my 5th birthday. This is me. I know I'm going to be so cute. I don't know what happened, but let's just move on. This is me and my mother. So really what's funny about that, I don't know if you realize, but that is us, we're having an argument about gifts or some such thing. And wow, that is my mother. She's hearing. When I was born, later, she found out that I was deaf. And she went ahead and was like, you know what? My child is deaf. I'm going to learn sign language. And she did that right away. She didn't wait. She got a book and she started studying and practicing. She had never even met a deaf person before. She lived in a very small rural community, and that changed my life. I would not be here today if it was not for her decision to go ahead and learn sign language. Wow. You know, a huge thank you to my mother for that. I was teaching high school for about 7 years till recently, and I had over 70 students, different backgrounds, different variety of students. I'm going to ask you a question. I'd like you to type your answer in the chat box just real quick. How many of those 70 plus students do you think had hearing parents that could sign? Just, I'll give you about 30 seconds to type that in the chat box. Half, okay. 5. Less than 5. 20%. 30%. 3. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So the actual answer is 0. 0. 0 of my students that arrived in my high school classroom could communicate with their parents and their families. Can you imagine? You grow up and you can't talk to your parents, your brothers, your sisters, your entire life. But it's happening, and it happened. I taught 7 years and not one student. And I thought, wow, that makes me realize, why was my mom different from those families? So research shows that most deaf people have hearing parents, most of them. Statistics really show that the average deaf adult reads and writes at a 4th grade level. That statistic has been going on for the last 30 years. They started looking at it like in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and on to today. And still, we have the same statistic. It's strange because curriculum has changed. Schools have changed. Educational approaches have changed. Technology has changed. But still, we're at the 4th grade level. That has been consistent. Why hasn't that changed? Has not yet been proven, but most of us in the deaf education community realize there is a correlation between the parents that cannot sign and kids that come into school with no language, no foundation. They start learning at age 3, 4, and 5. Wow, it's a widespread epidemic. These students who work in the these students that come in here, come into our deaf education classrooms have this. So language from the very beginning has a huge impact on many of them. Academically, socially, their mental health, and we're going to discuss that a little bit more later. You maybe know, maybe not, but really for the best time for learning language is anywhere between the 0 and 5 years old. That's kind of the quote unquote sweet spot. The brain is developing, the neural connections are going, and that is why different doctors encourage speaking to your baby, talking to your children, reading to your children, music. Even while they're pregnant, people are playing music for their babies. They're developing those connections. After the age of 5, it's a little bit more limited in their ability to get those going. So time is of the essence. Now, no language, which means there's a variety of different impacts. So if you don't have a first language, how could you be expected to become an expert in a second language? It doesn't work that way. Many people that are researching the bilingual students, actually, once they're more foundationally secure in their first language, they're able to transition into English and they're able to read and write. But if they have not yet developed their first language, it's much more difficult. You can't skip that important foundational piece. So it says only 18% of deaf people acquire a bachelor's degree. And that statistic includes hard of hearing and late deaf adults. So for statistics with deaf people who are born deaf, raised deaf, it's probably even less. Really, with a college degree, for most people, not all, but most people, they benefit. Their income is higher and they can benefit the rest of their lives. So finding that the deaf student who graduates college and those who don't graduate college, the comparison is quite different. There's a big gap there. There's for hearing people, there's about 30% gap of those who graduate and don't, but it doesn't even matter if the deaf child has taken some classes or not. If they don't finish and they don't graduate, there's still a very large gap in their earning wages. So mental and emotional impact on these students, they can get depression, anxiety. And so I suggest for those of you that are interested in the topic, if you could read Glickman, his book, just recently he came out with last year. It's very good. It talks about language deprivation and the impact they have on mental health. All right. So I taught and I noticed over and over again from my experience from my mom that last year I did my dissertation for my doctorate and I focused on why hearing parents learn to sign. And there isn't many of them, but those who do, why did you do it? What makes them different? And it was interesting. This is what I found. So I was wondering from their experience, those who learned to sign, what was their motivation? And we're going to find out. So I found 10 hearing parents who learned to sign, and I interviewed them. I passed them out a survey, and then did an assessment on all 10. I interviewed that I was going to interview, and I found similarities and I found differences. And for my participants, I had 3 categories. One, they had to be parents of deaf children or a deaf adult. They also needed to start early to learn to sign. And I had to make sure that they could sign, of course. And so I developed a basic assessment for them. So for my study, I had 3 questions that led me to my approach. So when and why? So that seems like such a simple question, but where's the answer? It's actually quite complicated. I also was wondering what their barriers were. What kind of support did they have? What was their experience? So I passed out a survey and some of the interesting things popped up in each of those surveys. Interesting that so for 9 out of 10 of the parents, their very first child was deaf. What does that mean? Not sure, but interesting. The one person whose child wasn't, her first child did have autism. So meaning all 10 knew that their first child had different needs. And that topic actually needs to be researched more. Does that have an influence or not? I know today is very different from way back when I was born. So different parents have different time periods. They are from different decades, and they have a wide variety, 70s, 80s, 90s, that these children were born. There's different technology, different accessibility, different educational approaches. So I wanted to see if religion or faith in God maybe had an influence on them. 7 out of 10 had some sort of religious, if they could have been active or inactive, but 9 out of 10 of them said they grew up in a home where religion was important. When I started the study, I wondered, was a college degree important? Would it have an impact on them learning sign language? So as you notice, most of them have some college, meaning 8 out of 10 didn't even graduate from college, but yet they still started learning sign. The other one of my concerns before I started the study was, will we see more opportunities for people who had higher income? So middle, upper class, would they be more likely to sign? But really, most of them earned less than $35,000 a year, meaning it's less than the standard for a middle class income. But yet still, they went ahead and learned to sign. So I was also wondering their exposure to the deaf community. Did they know any other deaf people? My mother had never met a deaf person before. So I wondered what their experience was. It was about half. Half did, half did not. And most of them didn't know their alphabet, meaning they started from scratch learning the ABCs and sign language, very basic. But yet they still did it, they were successful. Nine out of 10 learned sign language within the first 6 months. Most of them learned right away, meaning I'm wondering if that's the key, if that's the important piece of this, because if you postpone and you wait, it becomes more, you're used to the situation, maybe you're in some sort of denial. So my students that I had in high school hadn't yet started. So they just were like, they hadn't started signing. So they just kind of, it became normal for them. And I think that's a really important piece, time, getting started right away, getting that momentum going. Funny, the last person who learned within the first year had a wife who started classes, and he stayed home watching the child, and then they flipped. So meaning all 10 technically were involved very early. I was also wondering about cochlear implants. I wonder if that influenced the parents or if that was involved in any way. None of them had cochlear implants for their child. I want to discuss more about that a little bit later, but really, they accepted their child. They accepted who they were. They're deaf, okay? So we've got ASL and we're going to communicate and we're going to have a relationship with them. And that has a huge impact. That's very powerful. They didn't feel the need to fix or change that child. They were already perfect in every way. In the survey, I also asked them about their comfortability and their challenges and their support that they had. One thing, many of them who worked, people that work in the professional field in education, everyone says, oh, it's the doctors, they're the villain. But for the people that I interviewed, most of them really, they said their medical professional was neutral or positive. There was one doctor that was, you know, your child cannot benefit from any of these things, cochlear implants, or any of those things. So really it was interesting. So I wondered what's the correlation between this group that did not learn to sign. I wonder what their experiences with the doctors were. Most of them said they really benefited from individuals, teachers, speech therapists, audiologists that would show up into their lives and become a support, become an advocate. They would come to their home and teach them how to sign. And they just felt that really that started down their path to learning sign language. And most of them felt kind of negative about the school or the district or the educational system, so that they actually tried to push them in to take a different approach. Most of them said yes, they had family support. The other family members did not learn to sign, but they said, oh, that's cool, and just kind of went along with it. They weren't overly involved, and they did not learn to sign themselves, but the parents themselves learned to sign. So as far as resources go, they're out there. One mom, after the interview, came up and said, I want to let you know that really there is a lot of resources out there. You just have to be led to it. And I thought, wow, that's really good. So, you know, got to figure out a way to get to these parents, get to these new parents of deaf children and said, hey, oh, you have a deaf child? That's cool. And help them to the right resources. So I'm sure some of you have students in the ASL class now, or you are a student. And yeah, learning ASL is not always easy. It's a new language, just like Spanish or French. So half of them said, yeah, you know, it was a challenge, but they were still successful and they kept going. They persevered. So now, how do I answer my 3 questions? When and why? So we already kind of started talking about when. Most of them started right away. They said there was no other option. ASL was the only option. They were determined and they went for it. They accepted that their child was deaf and they need me to learn to sign. And for us to have a relationship, that's what needed to happen. They also had different motivations. They needed to communicate with their child. They did not want other people involved in teaching their child. They wanted to be the one to teach. They were thinking about the future, employment, college. They wanted to make sure that their child was successful. They also felt like learning ASL meant they were a good parent. I'm doing the right thing. Very motivated. The number one is they wanted a relationship with their child. Parents who I interviewed already had, some of them already had, their children were already adults, and they could see the benefit. They could still see that they had a good relationship with their child and even their grandchildren. So newer parents who are younger, had younger children that I interviewed, they were feeling, gosh, am I doing the right thing? Am I still going down the right path? You know, I can't see the forest through the trees. But after that interview, I told them, you're on the right path. Keep going. You will see the benefit years later. So if you are parents and you are here listening to this and you need to start learning sign language, or you've already started, good job, keep going. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Really, it's going to change that child's life for the better. Those that I interviewed definitely reaffirmed that. Now I'm going to share some quotes from my interviewers.
Looking at my child, I knew I had to communicate with him. I wanted to be that parent that communicated. Looking at my child growing with just basic conversation was not going to do it. How can I have meaningful conversation with her later? How can I really stay connected when she grows up and talks about more complex concepts? I didn't want her to go to school and learn how to talk to me. I wanted her to learn how to talk to me from me talking to her.
That's my child. I wanted to teach him the things that I wanted him to know, and not just have other people give him information, and I have no idea what other people are saying to him.
I wanted him to be successful. I didn't want him just living off welfare. I wanted him to be successful in his life and enjoy life.
I always had my faith and belief that he was going to grow up and be successful. My job is to know that when it's time for me to leave this world, that my children are able to take care of themselves.
Because I made a promise to a baby on her birthday that I would try my best always. I want the best for my deaf kid, so that is what I am going to do.
My son couldn't hear. If I wanted to have a relationship with him, that's what I needed to do.
My daughter, I would do anything to communicate with her and love her. That's basically it. What you would do for any child.
Well, I did it because I would do anything for her. I want to be able to talk to her about anything. Anything.
So those parents, okay, thank you. Anyway, so the parents, they had motivation. They wanted to keep going. And now they did have barriers, but it's funny because I asked them about their barriers and most of them said, yeah, I mean, I guess, but not really. And it makes sense because they learned sign, obviously, but I did identify some of their barriers. They learned a new language and it takes time. They had to go to class, they had to study. So that makes sense. Some of the parents, you know, really had to talk to their wife and they had to work out time and schedule. So that can be quite a challenge. And it's more of a challenge for those who are single parents. But they still made sure that that was a priority. Maybe they had to do night class or books at the same time. Many of them learned with their child, taught their child at the same time they were learning. Some of the people believe that you've got to become fluent, you've got to be a real stellar in ASL, and really, no, you just need to start. You start in the same place your kids are. You don't need to be fluent right away. You both develop and grow together, and that part's really important. And ASL is not easy. They said, wow, more classes they took, the harder it became. Some of them were concerned about the perception of other people. Will people be looking at me when I'm walking in public and talking to my child and I'm signing? And, would I feel a little bit embarrassed? But they didn't care about that. They just went ahead and overcame that. Some of them, other people criticized them. Like audiologists said, oh, you're a bad parent. Or like a church leader said, oh no, don't do that. And that kind of made some of them feel bad, but the parents that I interviewed didn't care. So what about them who had some of them that did get criticized? I wonder if they were impacted by that. And they also had themselves. Were they a little bit embarrassed, questioning themselves? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing enough? Overthinking. Wow, that can be quite a weight on them from the beginning. Some other quotes that the parents said, they talked about their barriers.
Also, some of the classes, like the more advanced classes, they only offer them during the day, and it's just too hard to get out of work.
Just because when we went through a divorce, taking classes through the college made it more difficult because I was having to work at the same time.
In the beginning, it is easier, but now it is harder. It's a different level. Now the academic level is the challenge.
Switching from SEE to ASL was difficult. I probably still have broken sign mixed. But yes, that was a challenge, and the facial expressions.
The concepts in sign language, some of them are difficult for me to understand or learn.
I'm sorry to say, our audiologist was awful. She left the room, she slammed the door, she said I was a bad parent. They said I damaged my child because I sign. Somehow ASL professors don't take the parents seriously. Like, here's the parent trying to learn sign language. So I cried many times. Like, I was not humiliated, but I felt down because I'm older. I am a parent. And I don't know, I feel like sometimes in college they didn't take us seriously.
Some of the deaf people had very strong, I don't know if you call it deaf pride, whatever you want to call it. It's been a big fight for me. I have not been welcomed in a lot of the deaf world.
I think at the beginning, it was first a mental block to kind of realize that I did not have the child I thought I was going to have. After the mental block was gone, the learning was fun.
I could say I understand why a lot of parents take the easy path because it's not easy. Going to Starbucks even in the beginning, that is scary. I thought I would never learn. I was so scared. I would cry and be intimidated.
There are plateaus. It was easy to pick up individual signs, but to string them together and communicate with adults, I would be awkward and not want to look foolish.
Wow, that's very powerful. But they found a way to overcome each of those barriers. So now I want to discuss what kind of support and experience they had within learning sign language. Wow, people. They said that there was individuals that showed up in their lives and made sure that they were on the right path. They were encouraging, they were supportive. Some of them were from the deaf community. Some of them were from, teachers and educators. Variety of people helped them to make sure, and they realized, you know what, it's going to be okay, and it's okay that you have a deaf child. Accept them for who they are. It's a new world out there, deaf culture, deaf world. It's exciting and it's interesting. those parents that I interviewed, they had grit. They were motivated. They would do whatever it takes to make sure that they did what they could for their child. We discussed they would drive an hour each way just to get their kid back and forth to the right place. They were willing to set up their own business to make sure that they were able to work from home. Different variety of things people did to help their child. They also feel like they had a purpose. God put me here to have a relationship with this child. Some of them also had families from other countries that spoke different languages, so they were comfortable learning different languages. They also had time to process. They thought, and I will discuss more of that later. Like I said previously, people that came into their lives, that were advocates, that were support system for them, they would never have never been on that path if people had not said, you know what, accept the child, and they accepted each other. So they said, otherwise, some of them were husbands and wives, some of them were a team.
I think I took it on my own and I started to look for classes, organizations. I went to every workshop that says deaf or hard of hearing was available. I went to everything. So I'm always learning.
I'm a fighter. I was going to do whatever it took to make sure that my son had the proper education.
Well, when I start something, I finish it.
I felt like as a parent, I was entrusted by God with this child, and it was not a mistake. I have a purpose. I think she has a purpose.
I believe that God put these certain people in my life that would help me. I could not have done it myself. He put people that I needed at the right time in my life.
So 7 out of 10 had parents or grandparents that spoke different languages. They grew up in that kind of environment. 4 out of 10 themselves spoke a third language. Research shows that those that have a second language, it's much easier to acquire a third. 6 out of 10 were from immigrant or migrant family members. 2 of them came to the US here, grew up here, and went to school here, and they both spoke Spanish and had to learn English. So they themselves had felt isolated. They used that experience to make sure that their child did not have the same experience. So currently, most of the parents find out that their child is deaf right away, and it's from universal newborn screening. So they practically know the same day or the same week, and that's pretty standard. So they don't really have the time, congratulations, you have a baby, and by the way, your child's deaf. They don't have that time to process what's going on. So those that I interviewed had more time to process. It was a special situation. So 4 of them did pass the newborn screening, but the screening was wrong. And later, they were like, something's different about my child. They were trying to, communicate or get them to do things, but they realized that they were deaf. So they had time to process, well, maybe their child's deaf. They had time to research and look through different things and look on the internet and talk to doctors. 3 of the participants' child were born hearing, and later, maybe age 2 or 3, they became sick from meningitis, and they became deaf later. So they could actually see the transition and the change And they also had time to process. For some of the parents, they actually had to convince the doctor, say, hey, you know, he's deaf, she's deaf. And they said, no, it's temporary, they're ignoring you. So in the process of trying to convince the doctor, they themselves realized and were able to accept that their child was deaf. So you can see a huge variety of different experiences and backgrounds and barriers. But the one thing that is similar and the same for all of the 10 participants, every single one of them, was acceptance of their child's deafness, period. They accepted that their child was deaf and they had to learn sign language. There was no other option. So I'm going to show you a quote from each of the parents. For the other part, some of the parents, like there was religion, there was a few other quotes about this, but this quote is from all 10 of the parents, meaning all of them.
From the minute we found out she was deaf, we knew that was our path.
I don't think the sadness stopped us from getting going. The next day, I think right after we found out, the next day, we were looking up resources.
I was crushed, of course, but yet I knew what I had to do.
I was not depressed about her deafness at all. That was never a problem for me. That first cry, I was done after that. Then I was like, that is my baby, and I will do whatever it takes.
Deafness is not an excuse for anybody.
It also may be that some people are just not comfortable with their child being different.
If all these parents could just get past their own feelings of denial, I guess, that their kids are not going to be like the typical kid, then that awareness will push them in the right direction. They just need to get out of their own way.
I think once the parents see deaf adults in the community and they see successes and they see them just flourishing in society like a typical hearing person would, then there is this tranquility that will come and you say, my child will be okay, will be okay. Until you're exposed to almost like a glimpse of the future of what your child might become. And then you are very scared. When you are scared, you stay in your comfort zone, which means then you make other people meet your needs.
Just thinking about it, no. We took it as, okay, this is the new normal. We just have to adapt. We jumped into action. I don't remember there being sadness or anything like that. Just, she was deaf. That is it.
I didn't look at how she needs to be fixed. We work with what we have. I don't see it as a disability. I see it as a difference.
So I interviewed and I analyzed this data, and that led me to my developmental of my theory, parent acceptance theory. So I'd like to discuss that a little bit. For any parent, there are barriers, as you could see. My interviewees, you could see the list of barriers. There was, time and perspective, and even themselves. They also had different motivations. Like, I need to teach my child. I want to have a relationship with my child. They had resources. They had support. They had a support system. So yes, they had barriers. They had motivation. I feel like all of the parents of deaf children, and any children, have barriers and have motivation. My students, their parents, do love their child. They want a relationship with their child. They're willing to do anything to make sure that their child gets what they need. They have the same kind of motivation. But what made those parents of my high school students different from those that learned to sign? And here's the answer: acceptance. I have students, or I had students, that parents were willing to fly to a different state. They were getting professional support, a lot of things, surgeries, cochlear implants, fancy vacations. Yet still, the one thing that they didn't do was learn to sign. So I'm going to show you my model here. Imagine a playground and starting to look up that slide. You see all the stairs. Maybe it feels really far. If you've got a lot of barriers, those can feel like, gosh, that's so tall. How can I get up all those stairs? How can I beat all those barriers? How can I get up there? Meaning you have to accept. You have to keep going. You have to persevere. There is a challenge. It's emotionally exhausting. But you have to keep going. Once you arrive at that top and you can see everything that's coming and you can benefit from those resources and use that motivation and use the people around you. There's so many people around that want to be supportive and want to help. But you've got to get out there and find that acceptance of your child. My child is deaf. That is still a perfect child. They can have everything. They can have all the dreams that you can imagine, but you've got to accept it and you've got to be willing to roll up your sleeves and get going. You have to do what it takes to learn to sign. That is the key. That's more important than money or educational background or family situations. Acceptance. So other children can use this theory as well. Blind, those with autism, but acceptance for who that child is, and that is still your sweet, perfect child. And then you go ahead and use the different resources that are out there for you. So, what do we do with all this information? Good question. That's why I'm here. First and foremost, many educators and leaders and principals and district administrators focus on things like curriculum, speech, accommodations. One thing that they avoid is the source. They look at the deaf child struggling in school, the parents that maybe don't sign, and I know many people prefer to avoid the topic. They can't confront the parents, of course. That's a very sticky situation, and it's dangerous for their career. But really, really, if you think about it, let's just say we were in another country and we knew if there was a religious sect out there somewhere and they decided, you know what, as children, we're never going to talk to our children. Wow, can you imagine the reaction here in the United States? There would be outrage. They don't talk to their children at all? But really, that's child abuse. It sounds awful, but it's time for us to accept that. Funny, because in other countries, the reaction that would happen here, it is happening in our communities. It's happening in our backyards. Where's the outrage? So when I tell other people, you know, that this is what's going on, they say, wow, that's awful. That's more than awful. It is very serious. It impacts their mental health and it impacts their academics and their emotional development for the rest of their lives. It's just like smoking. You know, we need to make the stigma that comes from smoking the same as not talking to your child. So here's the good news. We have people like you who are here listening. You guys play a role in some way. It may be a small role, it may be a big role, but it doesn't matter. We're all involved. So for example, if you are a professional or you're going to become a professional, make sure you work with the deaf staff at your school or in your area. They're the expert. They're here for the students. Make sure that you take advantage of their expertise and their resources. When I taught in school, there were those that worked with me that just, wow, the kids benefited from that viewpoint, and there were others that didn't, and the kids were influenced by each of those. More and more research is popping up, but really we need even more. When I started this study, I couldn't find any information on this topic. How is this happening? This is the year 2020. Where's the research? If you are interested in research, this is a perfect field. So it's a myth, maybe you know, that to learning sign does not affect reading and writing. Actually, it's a benefit. It will actually improve reading and writing. And it makes sense because you have a language that's developing. You're more confident in one language, you can develop the other one. It makes sense. Cochlear implant industries and the hearing aid industry, billion-dollar industry, billions of dollars in that industry. And they're scared of us. ASL, we need to make this normal for everybody. Just like Spanish or French. Oh, when you hear another person speak Spanish, you don't, stare at them. You just think, oh, okay, they're speaking Spanish. It becomes part of life. So really, each high school, each college should have an ASL class. So just like doctors, we need to, they often encourage babies and parents to sign to their baby. It doesn't matter if they're hearing or deaf, it's a benefit. Deafness. It's not a disability, it's a difference. We can see the benefit of a rich culture, within the language. We want to make it normal and standardized. A deaf person, you don't just, look at them and stare at them, it becomes normal. It's a normal thing. We just need more exposure, more classes, more news, TV, video games. Also, the parents are out there and they need our support. They're overwhelmed. They have this new baby. My baby is deaf. What do I do? There's so many different options being thrown their way. Find them, support them. Show them where the resources are. Tell them, congratulations. You're soon going to be involved in a very exciting community in a whole new world. You leave this presentation and you're going to be thinking about this. Acceptance. How can we encourage acceptance of ASL and the parents? Because the parents start to do the acceptance and the growing starts. It's the rest of their life. It's the momentum keeps going. So thank you so much. So do you have any questions? I'm happy to talk about that.
This is Kim. Dr. Dutra, thank you so much. So the interpreter will interpret for me, and then Nate, if you don't mind copy signing. That way everyone can see you. So we have one good question in the comments, in the chat. And again, if anyone else has comments, feel free to, questions to type them into the chat. But we have a question from Kyle. When you mentioned that parents can learn ASL along with their child, the question is, in order to develop a strong foundation in an L1, shouldn't the children have a strong language model? So if hearing parents are learning ASL alongside their children, how are we ensuring that they're developing those building blocks for language?
Okay, so the parents, what do you mean by language model? Yeah, let me back up and answer the question here, because I think I just read it in the chat here. So you are right. The children who have a strong language model, like many parents who I interviewed, they said they benefited from deaf adults. They invited me to go to their home, the practice with them. And so you're right. Yes, there is a language model is very important. And the parents who I interviewed did talk about that because they were able to talk to native speakers. So how do we make sure, again, exposure to deaf people and the community? You know, you don't just, you know, leave them there. You put them with other deaf families, the socializing, getting out. And you don't need to be fluent, really. Remember, like they're children, they're babies, maybe even 2 or 3. The parents can pick it up at the same time as the child. So that's one thing that many people are concerned about. Oh my goodness, I'm not fluent. I can't do that. It's okay. It's okay. Just keep going.
Thank you. We have another question here. I noticed that you talked a lot about parents learning ASL through college classes. Did you see that as the most common path for successful learning? I found it difficult to find a consistently good source to learn ASL to teach my hard of hearing son.
Yeah, I did talk about the college classes quite a bit, but most of the parents that I spoke with learned on their own. So they just found a book, they watched a video, they met deaf families. So to be honest with you, community colleges and classes are great. If you can go, absolutely. But really the best way is to find a deaf mentor. Depending on your community, if you find one deaf mentor that is willing to meet with you, chat with you, like another parent of deaf children, children to play together, that would be the best way to really pick up ASL for you. If you can find, you know, I think there's like ASCA. It's one organization that offers, I believe, free tutoring for a few sessions. And I can double check for that. Maybe I can email you. But really finding a deaf adult or a deaf family, you know, it's not easy, and I definitely understand that. But if you can do the community college, that's good too. It's perfect if you can actually have both, have the class and a deaf mentor or a deaf family, putting those two things together. Oh, in addition to that, oh, congratulations for being here. You're motivated. I love that. Kudos to you.
Any other questions? If you have questions that come up later, Dr. Dutra, if you don't mind, I can give you their email address. I can give them your email address. That way they can ask you any questions that come up later.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can definitely email me with any questions that come up later. Absolutely. Go ahead and do that. Thank you so much for all of your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. This was very powerful. I don't know about everyone else, but there was a moment where I got a little teary-eyed. It was very, very powerful. This is recorded, so I will post this on YouTube and I'll send you all the link. That way you can share it with anyone who couldn't make it today. But thank you, Dr. Dutra, so much. And thank you everyone for coming today.
You're welcome. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to see what you guys do in the future. Yeah, thank you, everybody.